Hey, welcome to Sound Test. This is Brian here, and today we're going to talk about the Obi Wan Kenobi show that premiered on Disney Plus. The season wrapped up with 6 episodes, possibly season, possibly end of the series. Don't quite know. And I also rewatched the Star Wars Prequel movies, episodes 1, 2, and 3, leading up to Obi Wan Kenobi. And so I'm going to kind of talk about those with a fresh perspective, as well as how they relate going into Obi Wan Kenobi. So let's talk a little bit about the prequel movies first. I'm kind of a late comer when it comes to the Star Wars universe. I didn't see any of the kid movies as a kid, so I didn't have a lot of the emotional baggage that a lot of people had. To make a long story short, the prequel movies were always kind of just historically seen as the worst. And a lot of people had a lot of problems with the prequel movies. I never had that experience. One, because I hadn't seen the original trilogy when I was a child. I think I may have seen bits and pieces of the, episode 4 or 5, maybe parts of them, but I never really saw the full movie as a child. And I think I remember seeing episode 1 as a child because that was coming out right when, I was at the age to see movies and things like that. So I remember vividly the Darth Maul. I remember the pod racing, and I remember a lot of those elements as a child, but Star Wars never, stuck with me. So this is coming from a somewhat new perspective. I started getting into the Star Wars franchise about last year. And my actual catalyst into getting me into the Star Wars series was Star Wars Battlefront 2, the EA game. I believe it was given away free through Epic Game Store. And I kind of just said, it's free. Let me try it out. And I just kind of fell in love with the environment, the world. And from there, I went to literally binge through all the movies. So this was me going through all the movies from a completely fresh perspective, no baggage or anything. And I did it in theatrical order, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Then I went to the spinoffs, Han Solo, Rogue One, and then finished off with 7, 8, 9. So when it comes to the prequel movies, I wanted to kind of rewatch them leading up to Obi Wan Kenobi, because this series takes place about 10 years after the events of episode 3. So I kind of wanted just a little refresher. It's been about a year since I had seen those movies. So I wanted a refresher, wanted to give them a second chance and kind of, see how I felt about them after giving it another go, essentially. So starting with episode 1. The Phantom Menace. Qui-Gon Jinn with Liam Neeson is definitely the star of the show in this. And I really like his character a lot because, he was kind of a precursor to the events that were going to unfold eventually in episode 3. And I say that because he's not your typical Jedi master in which he kind of follows all the rules and, he's this beacon of hope and stuff like that. Qui-Gon Jinn, his character was very he was very unorthodox in the things that he did. He talked in a certain way, which he wasn't direct with certain things. And he was, he took wild chances, like taking a chance on Anakin and taking a chance on this race. And you see a young Obi Wan Kenobi in here, and young Obi Wan is very much like a very strict to the books type of person. These are the rules. I'm going to follow them. This is how things are in place, and this is why. And Qui-Gon doesn't follow that, and it could be a very interesting dynamic between them with somebody who's very straight laced but following their master, who's kind of loosey goosey with the things that he does and the things how he acts as a Jedi. And I kind of wish the movie went a little bit more with that. So a lot of people will say that the Phantom Menace is boring. It is a pretty boring movie. But I kind of liked it from the world building aspect from certain things. So I think the intro starts off really strong, where, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon comes onto the ship, and that they're shrouded in mystery. They have the hoods on, and that was kind of like, so that was like a Jedi view that we didn't really get that much in the original trilogy. And, they're essentially kind of like monks, and so I like that introduction with them being kind of shrouded in mystery and then revealing themselves and then having to like immediately jump into the action. I think that first part is like a very strong first part. Then the movie kind of falters like immediately once they get to Naboo and we get introduced to Jar Jar and that whole world. That's when the movie starts to kind of falter. But certain aspects I really do like about, things that they set up in episode 1. So yeah, a lot of people talk about the politics and they go on and on about this. But, if you think about the overall, themes of Star Wars, it makes sense that, hey, it doesn't make sense there just to be an empire that just rules over the galaxy. It makes sense that there's different delegates, and it makes sense that there's an actual hierarchy in place when it comes to these social standings and how people are represented in these many different planets and systems and things like that. So for me, I found that kind of interesting. The original trilogies had them basically being, this is their last hope, this is their last shot at overthrowing this empire. And I like the concept of the prequel movies showing you how we got to this point. And, it wouldn't make sense that just instantly there's this huge thing, this huge entity that's taking over the world, or the galaxy. And so I actually liked some of these aspects of the original trilogy where you do explore those concepts. The problem is it gets a little messy. And the writing is not the best, or the, how they get to X, Y, and Z points are not the best. And that's why a lot of people kind of find episode 1 boring, because it kind of establishes a lot of these things. Established, the Republic, the Galactic Republic. It established that there are, leaders and representatives of these different nations and these different planets and solar systems and things like that. So it establishes all these things so you can basically see how it becomes the empire itself. But throughout episode 1, it's just a lot of world building. And we see, young Anakin. And my problem with young Anakin, I'm not going to talk about the actor, because one is a child actor at the time. And it has been well documented that Anakin, the actor for Anakin Skywalker and Jar Jar Binks have been through many years of abuse just from entitled, selfish fans. So I'm not going to do that. And again, I'm coming at this with no baggage. However, when it comes to the portrayal of Anakin Skywalker, I think throughout the entire prequel, the prequel movies, his characterization is just so all over the place. And the problem with the prequels is that when they first started, people coming in with the idea and concept of this is going to be Darth Vader. We already know that the end story of this, is essentially like a old Greek tragedy where the end of the story before it begins, or I should say like a mythology type of thing where that in order to get to this certain point, there's got to be a whole bunch of things that happen. So we know the end result. We just want to know how it gets to that point. So when it comes to young Anakin, their reasonings basically for not to train him is that he's too young, even though he has all this latent power. And My issue is that, okay, I get it. They have rules in place and things like that. But I think there should have been a better way to show the potential of Anakin. So, he's essentially a good kid throughout this entire movie, which doesn't make sense of him eventually becoming, this powerful dictator. And like there was a scene where they were trying to see if he was ready for this, ready for the training, and they were showing him, he had to guess all these images of things like that, or use the Force or whatever. But I feel like a better way to show that he has this latent ability was like maybe in that scene they were asking him some type of questions or having him use the Force to recognize certain things. And I think a better way to demonstrate that was maybe to have a scene where maybe they said, hey, we get that you have this power, but we're not going to train you. And he gets angry because, he's a child. And because he gets angry, like maybe he stomps his foot and like the Force pushes everybody in the Jedi Council back, or like he shatters, glass just like by being angry, closing his fist, or something to show that he has this latent ability within him. And for everybody to be like, whoa, this kid has a lot of power. And then that should have been the catalyst for them training him was, hey, this kid does have a lot of power. Maybe we should train him so he can control this power, or that we can make sure that he doesn't, fall into the clutches of evil or something like that. That would have been a way more compelling story to why they needed to train Anakin in the first place. And so, with all that, we'll venture on to episode 2. Obviously the, Darth Maul, Obi-Wan, and Qui-Gon fight is stellar. And that was another thing that the prequels kind of brought was this. The prequels was way more action heavy when it came to the lightsaber battles. In the original trilogy, lightsaber battles were very kind of drawn out, very intricate, lots of deliberate movements. And that kind of comes from the old idea in which George Lucas kind of had the idea that these lightsabers were really big, heavy things, and kind of treated them more like swordsmanship, where every move was very calculated and dedicated. Well, and that kind of makes sense in the context of, Luke is a young user of the lightsaber. This is his first time using it. And Obi-Wan, he's an old man at the point of the original trilogy. So maybe he's a little bit more calm, collected, and deliberate with his movements with the lightsaber. We're talking about in the prequels, this is many years before all that, where the Jedi were, plentiful. So maybe this is why they're more agile. They're more quickly with it because they've been training with this for a very long time. They've essentially been, children training with the lightsaber, and they understand how to do certain things, certain movements and things like that. That's my justification for it. So moving on to episode 2, when we show Anakin, and I think Christian Haydenson can be a fantastic Anakin Skywalker. It was just unfortunate of his writing and his direction, because I like the idea that, Anakin is having this duality of he wants to be more powerful, he wants to do more, but he understands that he must rise up in the ranks. He must make his way up into, being a Jedi Master. In episode 2, he understands that he's in this place. But for whatever reason, it goes off with really like uncomfortable scenes with him, and, how he's interacting with Padme. It is all just very uncomfortable through a lot. And there's just parts of that movie where it's just painful to watch, and it's not because of that actors are bad. It's just their direction, their dialogue is just not it, And obviously we all know the scene where Anakin finds his mother, and he gets his revenge, and I just feel like it's so out of nowhere, his violence in that scene. And I feel like if we've established that in the beginning, in the first movie, where, he's shown this little spurts of anger, or maybe, he uses the time in episode 1 to slowly reveal that he's kind of unstable mentally. It would have made way more sense in episode 2 when he does the things that he does. And I think another issue of episode 2 is that they find plot reasons to separate Obi-Wan and Anakin, and we don't get to see them play off each other enough. And the fact that, he is essentially going through his younger years, his angsty years. This would have been a great opportunity to show the relationship between him and Obi-Wan, because it comes off as so antagonistic between them two. And I think that's why I'm saying this, the writing fails them, because if the situations were put in place in episode 2 where they could interact with each other much, much more. And we can see that there's times that they're very, very close, but there's also times where there's tension between them. That's a way more compelling argument. But in episode 2, it just kind of seems like, Anakin is just angry at Obi-Wan at almost every situation, almost every, instance. And again, that's just lack of good direction, lack of good writing, lack of good opportunities and moments for them to interact with each other. And then also there's just weird scenes like, that first chase scene, during the attempted assassination of Padme. And it's just like a lot of those situations, I understand what they're trying to do, but that could have been solved and done in many different ways, more effective storytelling ways. So, and I'm rushing kind of through this and really talking about the relationship a lot with Obi-Wan and Anakin leading up into what we see in Obi Wan Kenobi. So episode 3, we do see a little bit of that chemistry of, Obi-Wan and Anakin, and we kind of see them interact a lot. We kind of see them, have that brotherly aspect. There's a little bit of tension here and there, but it's definitely episode 3 is definitely the better of the, prequel movies, but it seems like every element of episode 3 is just rushed. And, that's because they're essentially like, hey, we got to get to the point where he's Vader at the end. That was what's going to happen at the end of this. And I feel like there's certain elements of 3 that could have been spread out in episodes 1 and 2. I feel like we spent a lot of unnecessary time in episodes 1 and 2 not going for the overall plot. And it should have been, with episode 3 in mind, knowing that, hey, we're going to get to this place, there should have been certain elements put in place in episodes 1 and 2 to, more conveniently lead us into what's happening, what's going to happen in episode 3. And, the unfortunate part is there's story elements that happen. We just see them in the Clone Wars animated series rather than in episode 2. So there's times in the Clone Wars where we do see, the connection of Anakin and Obi-Wan. And we see how respected Anakin is during the Clone Wars and how he's essentially a general and he has rank. That would have been way more effective to us as the viewer if we knew how respected he is. Because almost, the movies get off this kind of feeling that in episode 3 that they just kind of deal with Anakin in a lot of, instances. It's not like he doesn't feel like he's being respected and the Jedi Council don't respect him. And of course, that's the, catalyst to him falling into Palpatine's crutches. But it just seems, it seems unrealistic that he's such a crucial part of the story. We know that he's a crucial part to the Jedi Order, but we don't get to really experience that through episode 3. So, rewatching the prequel movies leading up to Obi-Wan, it was better a second showing than it was the first one. Definitely a better representation of what they could have been. I definitely think the prequel movies, certain elements, obviously the CG doesn't hold up much nowadays. Back then it was very groundbreaking, the CG, but now it's kind of distracting in certain elements. But plot wise, it could have been so much better. And I think the Wars animated show tries to mitigate a lot of that stuff, try to fill in the blanks, try to make us understand the emotional connection that Anakin had with Obi-Wan. So now, with all that being said, how does that stack up leading into Obi Wan Kenobi, the show that premiered on Disney Plus this year? So first off, I really enjoyed the Obi Wan Kenobi series. Taking place 10 years after the prequels, it gives us enough time after Order 66 to kind of see the shift with the Empire coming into place, and how scary, the Empire is to the everyday. Because we start off with, Obi-Wan already kind of into that Ben persona, and he's kind of living as a hermit. He doesn't have a lot of connections. He's hiding out. He's like trying to keep a watchful eye on Luke, which Owen Large doesn't like at all. And, when it comes to his character growth, Kenobi's character growth from the beginning of the series to the end, I think it is a good one. So let's talk about characters first. So, Ewan McGregor returns as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and at the beginning of the series, you can see he's visually aged. You can see that he's been through some stuff. He's living this life, and it's not a glamorous life. And he stays to himself. He lives alone, and there's no aspect of him being a Jedi anymore. And, over the course of the series, as he meets Princess Leia, as he goes against the third sister and goes against Vader himself, and he kind of reconnects with the Force, it shows, how much he's gone back from his days of, the Clone Wars or Episode 3, where he was his Jedi to be feared. Obviously his personality was a great one in the original trilogy, but that personality is not here at the beginning because he's just this very depressive old man. And he's, the actions he take place where people are asking for his help and he just completely denies them, and that's like not the Obi-Wan Kenobi way. He's not supposed to be this person who denies people from help. He's always there to jump in a moment's place. And him slowly realizing what he was, him slowly realizing getting back into essentially his hopefulness for the world, because of the nature of it, because it is a show within 6 episodes. There's certain beats where it's like, all right, this is where he realizes this point, this is where he realizes this point, this is where he started using the Force again. We have those moments in there, and those are going to be a bit stereotypical, but all of it serves towards the end where Kenobi is much more hopeful. Now, obviously, this is with it being 10 years past Episode 3, but still being like another, I don't know, maybe 7 to 8 years before Episode 4. There's still like a lot of just empty time within that. So one, you can kind of think, for the viewer, you're kind of thinking, all right, so what happened in the other 7 or so years? He's hopeful in this, close to, his personality in Episode 4, where he is a more hopeful person, and him, training Anakin, and him, taking on Vader once again, taking the Empire once again. He clearly stays out of that lifestyle after a certain point, but this still leaves a lot open for his character, and where he eventually leads up to in Episode 4. Let's talk about Princess Leia. I think the actress did a wonderful job. She acts like a kid. And when I mean she acts like a kid, she's not like, again, young Anakin, where it's just over the top and, he's excited about everything and he's doing all these childish things. He's there for a comic relief. It's not that aspect. Princess Leia's character as a child does have a lot of correlation to her character as an adult. She's, fearless. She's very much, into her ways in which, she's going to get what she wants. She's not going to be intimidated by anybody. And she's not going to allow, people to essentially just walk over her just because she's a child. But she's also very, very intelligent. Usually when whatever tribe of opposition is trying to get into her head mentally, she doesn't allow that to happen. And, she's smarter than many of these adults treat her. And, she just did a fantastic job overall. Kudos to her direction with Layla. Then we have Reva. And I really, really liked Reva. I think their character motivations for her could have been a little bit better in terms of how they executed how she's, why she's doing the things that she's doing. I think that could have been executed better. So before I go to that, I got to mention, if you wasn't aware, there's a huge controversy regarding her, and just put it point blank, because of racists, because she was a prominent female black character who was very powerful. Many people immediately went to racism online, and of course I have to address this, but it is ridiculous that in 2022, a franchise like Star Wars that has been a series since the 1970s and has had several prominent black characters in its fan base, in its continuity, it is ridiculous that we're in 2022 and we're still having hateful, quote unquote, fans of the series when, you have the voice of Vader by a black person. You have Lando, who's been portrayed by two different black people. And you have, other sprinklings of black characters throughout the Star Wars franchise of other ethnicities as well. And to the point that it should just be a normal thing to see people of different color. And, the character, the actress for Reva, she did a fantastic job. And, she had other acting roles before this, but this is essentially her big break. And I think she did fantastic in here. Now, I do feel the first parts, she's a little overacting. And I don't, that may be plot reason why she's kind of over the top at the very beginning. And she's kind of cartoonish villain, kind of over the top at certain aspects and certain points. And I think that's kind of because she's trying to prove herself. She's trying to prove that she can be the Grand Inquisitor. She's trying to prove why she's, the third sister. She's trying to prove her power within, the Empire and how she's trying to get up into that ranking. So I believe that's the reason why she's, so over the top in those aspects. But then we look at towards the end, and when she's been humbled, boy, she's a different character when she's been humbled. I think her fight with her and Vader is fantastic. It really shows Vader's skills and how well versed he is with the Force, and it shows how, even though that Vader should be technically crippled because of the events of Episode 3, it still shows that his powers with the Force are stronger than ever before. And I think plot wise, some people will have issues with how essentially she survived the assault on Order 66 as a youngling when she came close contact with Anakin Skywalker. And then somehow again, she survived getting another blade, through her body. And, I think the only way they could have maybe spun this was, because we've seen in the past that Jedi could have quick healing properties or quick healing powers, that they can use the Force to do that. Maybe if they kind of establish that, maybe like in the first episode, she gets injured and then she recovers quickly. Maybe if they establish that, that would make a little bit more sense. But you get a little bit of disbelief when it's like, okay, she survived as a youngling. Cool. That was a miracle. All right. She survived another, attack directly to the stomach. All right. That's pushing it. And yeah, she was visually hurt in the last episode, but it's still kind of like, all right, you're pushing it in terms of how resilient you are. But I really liked her character. And I really liked how she was kind of doing this triple agent type of thing where, her whole purpose was to get close to Vader to exact her revenge. And I loved how Vader was just like, nah, I already knew what you was going to do, what you was doing. I already understood well in advance that you was going to betray me, and I loved his like wickedness because of that. And, that kind of shows the difference where, Reva's very she's still very immature, because if she was a youngling during Order 66, she was probably, let's just say, under 10 years old. This is 10 years later, so she's still relatively young. Essentially, she's the age of Anakin during Order 66. That's how old she is essentially now during this time. And, I would love to have a way to explore her character more so we can see, because they made the comment of that we got her from that they got her from the gutter. So it'll be interesting to see how she comes from the gutter, essentially. I would love to see how she becomes Reva, how she becomes the third sister, and what things happen to get her into this place. I would love for them to explore that more. And I would like to see where they take her character from now. So, she's obviously very mournful about the things that she did, and how she couldn't kill Luke Skywalker. And from here, I would love to explore where does she feel, where is she mentally from this point? If she's not part of the Empire and she's obviously not a Jedi anymore, or she never became a Jedi. She's not a Jedi. She's not part of the Empire, but yet she has all this power, all this anger, all this confusion. What does that mean for her in the future? So I would love to, if we had like another mini series on her, or maybe just a one-shot show where we could explore more about Reva's character and, what is she doing in that period after Kenobi leading up into episode 4. And maybe she does run back into Kenobi. Maybe, she runs back into Vader, and how does that fight happen? So yeah, let's also talk about Vader. So Darth Vader in here, one of the issues kind of with Vader's character is that in the original trilogy, he's seen more as this, very slow moving character. He's essentially a horror villain, only because he's very slow. He's very methodical in his movements. We typically see Vader as this kind of slow, encroaching, villain. But in here, I'm glad they kind of taken the reins off a bit and kind of let him be a little bit more violent, a little bit more, unhinged. And that first scene you see him in, where he comes in and he's just throwing people left and right when he's looking for Kenobi, when he's looking for Kenobi, and he's throwing people left and right, and Kenobi senses him, and he feels like how powerful he is without even seeing him, without even knowing, what he becomes. And, his fight with Kenobi, he's way more nimble, way more, it's closer to what we saw with Anakin Skywalker. And obviously this is, again, 10 years after the events of episode 3. There's another, again, 7 or 8 years or so before we get to the events of episode 4. So this is him still essentially in his prime. This is him still, super as flexible as he can be with, the things that happen in episode 3. But his characterization is fearful, and I like it. I like how nimble is and how egotistic he is, and I feel like we never got enough of Vader as this encroaching force. Like, we knew he was this big bad in the original trilogy, but we didn't get enough screen time of him being this super fearful character, of him participating in a lot of action scenes outside of his battles with Luke Skywalker. So his battles with Obi-Wan and Reva, I think, are like some of the best that we've seen in a long time when it comes to the Star Wars media. The choreography is really good. His battle with Kenobi, it does get a little ridiculous when Kenobi has all these boulders and he's sending them out towards Vader. It gets kind of ridiculous in those instances, but I still believe that this representation of Vader was a good one, and it had a lot of good character moments as well. That Kenobi and Vader fight, when they're essentially, when Kenobi wins by attacking, his character, attacking his mental, and, essentially crippling him by disabling his electronics and getting a really good slash at his helmet. And, it's such a great scene where you hear the Vader voice and, the Anakin voice clipping in and out of each other, and you hear the pained voice of Anakin with juxtaposed with the fearful voice of Vader, and you hear there's a little bit of Anakin still in there, and Obi-Wan wants that out, that part of him to come back out. But at that point, when he says, "No, I killed Anakin Skywalker," that was the point where Obi-Wan Kenobi was like, then I must do what I must do. So let's talk about the overall plot. I felt it had a really decent beginning with episodes 1 and 2, where we established, Obi-Wan's life, how his new life is, and how he must kind of look from afar from society and not actively be in it, and just kind of see people get treated terribly and know that he can't do anything, because if he's outed as a Jedi, then, that's it. And, with the kidnapping of Princess Leia, and then that's bringing his catalyst of him having to get in there, because, in everything leading up to this, we saw, young Luke, but we never saw young Layla. And that was obviously a good red herring for all of us to see his interaction with Leia. And that makes sense because, Leia specifically requests for him in episode 4. So they've had to have met beforehand to set those things up. And I think the story gets a little muddy in the middle, only because it's kind of like, all right, she gets kidnapped again. All right, we got to, go save her. And then we're tracked, and oh no, they're going to follow us. I think all that kind of gets a little, all right, we get it. I felt like there could have been more ways to there could have been better ways to set up Vader and Obi-Wan meeting, or Reva and Obi-Wan meeting, or there could have been better ways to do that. And it just kind of feels like, all right, we have to do this cartoonish thing where we're hiding this child under a trench coat, or we have to sneak into this this Empire base to get in, and those just kind of felt tropey. And it's unfortunate because there's some really cool scenes, like the scene where essentially they're hitchhiking, Obi-Wan and Leia's hitchhiking, and they get picked up, and then these stormtroopers come, and he has to try to act as normal as possible around these stormtroopers. And like, we see his story falls apart, and they get more and more suspicious. And like, I like stuff like that, of the tension of that, because Obi-Wan knows that, hey, he hasn't done this heroics thing in a while. He's not ready to take on these stormtroopers. And, we as the audience knows that. So there's certain elements in there that's really, really good. I do definitely think that the last 2 episodes was very fantastic. The idea that, hey, Reva and the Empire is here, and we have to try to buy time as much as possible. And Kenobi, coming to address her personally and addressing her up front, and the nice dialogue that they have, and obviously the Reva and Darth Vader fight. And then that whole last episode was fantastic. I think it wrapped it up very, very well. We got a good amount of time with the fight with Obi Wan and Vader, and it left it open-ended enough where they could have a second season. They could explore more adventures with Obi Wan. They could explore more with Reva, with her place in this universe now. And I would love to see, obviously, they show Qui-Gon Jinn, the return of Qui-Gon Jinn at the end. And let me just say, Liam Neeson looked fantastic. Like, he didn't look a day older from when he played him back in the 90s, which is pretty ridiculous. Like, it looked great. And I would love to hopefully see if we have a hypothetical season 2 of Obi-Wan. It'll be great to see Qui-Gon, as a Force ghost, kind of still trying to mentor Obi-Wan and try to, maybe that would be his catalyst for him being even more hopeful and maybe him assisting the rebellion. And maybe he can have something to do with Reva's new place in this universe. So I think it in a very fan pleasing way that they could definitely build upon and show more season 2. Now, if they do indeed do a season 2, I would love for them to also kind of show the growth of the rebellion, show them slowly, building more steam, show them getting to be more of a force, and see kind of like the ragtag efforts of them. I think they're going to do that a little bit in Andor, which is coming up soon. They're obviously going to explore that aspect a lot, since Andor is taking place a little bit before the events of Rogue One. But yeah, I would like to see that in the hypothetical season 2. We see those elements come into place. So that's been my thoughts on the Obi-Wan series and my kind of watching of the prequel movies. Yeah, I'm hopeful that there's going to be a season 2. I would love to see, obviously Ewan McGregor come back. I would love to see also some more of Hayden Christensen. I'd like to see more flashbacks between, seeing how he was more of a general and see his kind of like maybe sprinkle in some more elements of him slowly becoming into the dark side, or, maybe Palpatine's influence a little bit more than what we just saw in episode 3, maybe something a little bit beforehand, and see how he's hanging out with the Emperor more, or how he having more of these violent tendencies to make it make sense to his, eventual Darth Vader character that we see in episode 4. So I hope you all enjoyed this. If you did, do the whole YouTube and podcast things, like it, share it, try to spread it out, and subscribe if you want to see more video game, anime, music, or whatever content here on Sound Test. This has been Brian. This has been Sound Test, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.